What is up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Backup Fantasy Sports. It is Tuesday, June 13th. My name is Euan, and on today's episode, we will be getting into some F1 fantasy with the 2023 Canadian Grand Prix preview. Last week, I did an episode on best of the back markers updated from earlier in the season, but I did it with a 7-race update. So just wanted to check in there. And yeah, you should go check that out if you're looking for some more F1 fantasy content. But we are here today for a Canadian Grand Prix preview. And we need to, first of all, go back to the Spanish Grand Prix because we need to see what was going on there, what happened. Great weekend for Mercedes. Best weekend for Max Verstappen, as per usual. There was some qualifying drama as you can see there, Pierre Gasly, he qualified 4th, but he had 2 3-place grid penalties, and he ended up 10th. During the race, there was a lot of pit stops going on, the first 2-stop strategy of the season, I believe. So that was exciting. Yuki Tsunoda got hit with a 5-second time penalty right at the end when he was battling with Zhou Guanyu. Unfortunately, dropped him out of the points, but overall, a pretty good day. Lance Stroll trolled us all by getting back on top, finishing 6th there and having one of his best races since the first weekend in Bahrain. Kind of punished me, as you can see, with my overall rank. Took a little bit of a nosedive there as I opted to go with Pierre Gasly and Nico Hülkenberg compared to just staying with the tried and true meta and going with Lance Stroll and Zhou Guanyu or Yuki Tsunoda. That's why the title of this week's episode is More Meta in Montreal. Let's get into it, though. So what were the facts and stats from the Spanish Grand Prix? Well, the optimal team was a little bit different than what we've seen here. Verstappen ×2, as always. Stroll, Zhou Guanyu, Yuki Tsunoda, but actually going double premium drivers with Lewis Hamilton, as he had a fantastic weekend. Positions gained, lots of moving parts here. Russell had 9 as he had a bad qualifying. Overtakes, Zhou Guanyu once again getting it done in that Alfa Romeo. Fastest pit stop, though, Red Bull took all 18 points as they continue to dominate the pit stop standings for the 2023 season. Getting over to where the drivers now stand after 7 races. First column there is Spain, then last 3 races, points per race, season long, and points per million, season long as well. Lewis Hamilton catching up here. He is actually 2nd in points per race over the last 3 races. So very encouraging for the 7-time world champion. George Russell coming through. Fernando Alonso probably had his most difficult weekend of the season so far. He sustained some floor damage in the first practice in Barcelona, and his weekend was kind of compromised for the rest, but he has been promising a lot of upgrades for the Aston Martin team in Canada, and it's going to be very interesting to see how that all shakes out, as Mercedes last season, they took some upgrades to Barcelona. It looked good, had a great finish in Barcelona as well, like they did this year. And then they went to Canada and kind of struggled again. So we will see if this Mercedes upgrade package is better than last season. So this is the top 10 here in points per race for the season. Here's the bottom 10. Esteban Ocon could not replicate his Monaco triumph, falling a little bit down, not getting 3rd place this time. Yuki Tsunoda, the hard luck of the day, probably right above Lando Norris here. Qualified 3rd on Saturday, clipped Hamilton in like the 2nd turn, and his day was just totally over. Very unfortunate for him. Nico Hülkenberg kind of went tumbling down the ranks, as has been the case for Haas. If they qualify well, they just do not have that race day car. So quite unfortunate for the German driver here. Alex Albon, Logan Sargent still all the way down at the bottom there. But I did I kind of broke it all down in that best of the back markers video. So I would highly encourage you to go watch it and like. And if you subscribe to the channel, you'll always get those little alerts whenever a new video pops up, especially with the summer break. Only a month and a half, few weeks away at this point, so I'll definitely be getting out more non-race preview content while that's going on. Over here to the constructors fantasy points, Red Bull they're incredible. It's like, I mean, I know Aston Martin is the best points per million right now, but Red Bull just clocking in almost 100 points every week. It is quite absurd. Averaging 90 for this season is just great. I think in Bahrain, they had a little bit of a problem, and then it's kind of just been 90 points every week since then. They're 3.31 million. Mercedes finally overtaking Ferrari there in the constructor standings. Points per million as well. They're worth double, so still not as good as Red Bull, but Mercedes, if you're playing, I know some people are playing like a non-Red Bull league, that kind of thing, Mercedes right up there with Ferrari to be the constructor if you would like to go that way. Driver of the day was Lewis Hamilton. Hammer time here. Qualified fifth, but ended up starting fourth due to the Pierre Gasly penalties that he suffered. So he got 2 positions gained, 3 overtakes, 39 fantasy points was a new season high. He has mentioned it earlier, he has the second most points per race in the last 3 races, averaging 30.33 points per race. And he now has at least 24 points in 4 of his last 5 races. So the Brit is getting back into form. He's not going to come anywhere close to our fantasy teams right now, just with Max Verstappen being right there as well. There's no need to go double premium, although that was the optimal team last weekend. Until it's a very consistent, I don't think a lot of people will be going with the 2 most expensive drivers on the grid. But great weekend for Lewis Hamilton as the Mercedes looked pretty snazzy with those side pods and looked pretty quick at times as well. Some price changes, not a lot actually, not really going up. Just Max, Lewis, George, the podium all went up a little bit. So good job by them. Going down here, we had Lando, Oscar, Valtteri. They all had tough days, dropping 0.1 in price. And then the next was Alex, Nick, and Nico. So prices still not fluctuating enough to really make a huge change to the meta or what we're all trying to do. That will be what I mostly talk about when I get to the actual Canadian Grand Prix preview part, which is coming up very quickly here. But yeah, Alex Albon was kind of an option. It might be okay in Canada, but until we get some FP1, FP2 times, still not going to go anywhere near the Williams. Nico Hulkenberg, not awful, but should have just gone with Joe and Yuki Tsunoda. Always captain hindsight. Wonderful thing. What are you going to do about it? Over here, more constructor price changes. Only 3 changes here. Red Bull went up once again. McLaren and Williams went down, but those 2 are also nowhere near our F1 fantasy teams. But Canadian Grand Prix preview. Here we go. 2 DRS zones, 14 corners. Been around for a long time. Considered one of the old school tracks, one of the favorite tracks around for some diehard F1 fans. It's pretty tough on the F1 game. They've got those really crazy hairpins, but you can kind of lay out. It is a very fun track to play. So I would highly recommend it if you have the F1 2022 game and whenever the 2023 game comes out, which should be shortly, I would assume. Last year, here we had qualifying. Alonso did pretty well in the Alpine. Mercedes was okay. I mean, 3-4 is still a good finish for Mercedes, but they didn't really get to where they want to go with those upgrades that they were bringing. They didn't really bounce along. Lewis Hamilton still finished 3rd. If I remember correctly, I think the Canadian Grand Prix was where he was dealing with the back problems after the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, and he was maybe not even going to race, needed a lot of physical therapy just to even get there. So to finish 3rd is good. Would tout him for another strong finish this weekend. But the problem is, I think, with what I have been reading, is that the Canadian track is very downforce heavy, and it may not suit the Mercedes as much as like a Red Bull or Ferrari or an Aston Martin. So we'll see how those go, see if Mercedes can adjust. I think they've actually come out themselves and said that this track is not going to suit their upgrades all that well. So it could be a slightly tougher weekend for the Silver Arrows in Canada. Weather, always got to check it now, especially in F1, but there's actually those wildfires going on in Canada. But I was listening to the Missed Apex podcast, or the race actually, and they were saying that the system that's controlling, or not controlling, but where the wildfire smoke is going is missing where the Canadian Grand Prix will be. So they shouldn't be affected by that smoke, like with those crazy pictures you saw from New York last week when the Yankees and the White Sox were playing. That was some incredible stuff, incredibly scary, but just like, wow, like that was a lot of smoke. But here we go. We got some possible rain on Friday. This is accurate as of today. Saturday should be clear. Sunday, mostly sunny, 20% chance of rain, but this is from AccuWeather. So they don't think the weather should come into play, especially in qualifying, and hopefully the rain will stay away on Sunday and give us a nice dry race to see all these cars performing at their tip-top best. Now, into kind of the main part of the preview here, to meta or not to meta? That is the question. It burned me last week in Barcelona. I felt good about it. I knew I was taking a risk. I don't regret it. It's frustrating to lose rank, to lose points, but here is how it's kind of gone this season. For my team, there is that first column, over 2,000 points, not too shabby. But the meta, which for this exercise, I have just kind of gone with Verstappen, Perez, Alonso, Stroll, and then Zhou Guanyu. I wasn't going to flip-flop between Zhou Guanyu and Yuki Tsunoda each week, so I just went with Zhou, one of the highest scoring back markers this year. So you could just set and forget. This is a team you could have had at the beginning of the season. You could have just set it. That's what we're going to call the meta. Optimal team is courtesy of F1FantasyTools.com. They show us the optimal team every week. Highly suggest going there if you want to see breakdown race by race. They certainly help me put my tables together as well with some of their data. The optimal team there, so the best you can have is 2,268 points. None of these teams have used chips. So that should also, there might, like if you look at the number one in the world, I think he's at 2,300 points already or something, but he has used a chip, I believe, or two. I'd have to double check that. But just kind of breaking down that it's almost 100-point difference if you're just stuck to your like boring old guns with the meta. And while it's tempting to go back to that and just kind of clock in your points, it's almost like freeing to be like, oh, well, now I'm chasing. Now I can kind of go with other strategies. And I think something that you kind of need to think of when it comes to that is, while that is like freeing and exciting, like the game is kind of all over the place, you can do what you want. If you are in this to get a really good overall rank, it may come down to what you think about Mr. Lance Stroll. So according to Formula One, there are 7 street circuits this year. We just had 5 of them in the first 7. The other 2 are Singapore and Las Vegas. That's what they classify as street tracks. So out of the first 7 races, 5 of them have been on street circuits: Saudi Arabia, Australia, Azerbaijan, Miami, and Monaco. As you can see, Lance Stroll has not done very well in those races. But with Bahrain and Spain, he did quite well. He had 2 of his best races of the year. No DNFs. Is Stroll going to become more reliable? And I think the question is, if you want to trust him again, if you want to get him back in your lineup, then you can go with the meta, because you're not going to catch up in overall rank. But if you just want to stabilize, kind of stay the course, get more data, see what this Mercedes upgrade does. Like, does this Aston Martin upgrade come through? this is probably the way to go. If you're going to put the waiting game, if you're going to use your chips mostly in the back half of the season, I think meta is probably a safe way to go. Is that what I'm going to do? That is something that I'm probably not going to decide until I see all of the practice times. I'm leaning, now that I've dug myself this hole, it feels like it's a kind of a pivot point in my season. Like, do I keep digging the hole to try and get out of it? Or do I just try to climb out right now, join the rest of the gang, and go back with Lance and Zhou Guanyu? Probably the safe option, probably the sensible option, because Zhou Guanyu and Yuki Tsunoda have been great this season and not even bad. Like, I'm not even sure if we should consider them back markers now, just because they are cheap, but they're outperforming most of the guys ahead of them in salary. They're getting more fantasy points just with how the game is constructed. So certainly something to think. But if you want to dance with Lance, you can definitely look at here. Canada is considered just a track circuit. Sorry about the wording if that's incorrect, but he would be in line for maybe a more comfortable race. It's his home race. It's definitely something to think about in your thinking as you construct your team for this weekend. And it is part of my thinking as well here. So I've got three options here. I've got option A, which is just back to the meta with Gasly to Stroll, and then Hülkenberg back to Zhou or Tsunoda. That would be the safe, boring option. Option B would be to continue to chase, like kind of really go in with this, trying to be different, trying to make gains, trying to do something different strategy, and just get Sergio Perez out and bring in George Russell. I have enough salary or cost cap available to do that move as well. That would leave me very exposed to the meta, and that could really, really hurt. I did not enjoy having Nico Hülkenberg in my team for the Barcelona race, and that leads me, kind of makes me wary about just going that much against the meta, going that much against Red Bull. But Perez hasn't been driving as well. His points per race is down. It's something to think about. The Mercedes seem to be on the rise. I could definitely see a world where the typical week is like Verstappen, and then a couple of Mercedes, a Fernando Alonso maybe mixed in there, and then Sergio is like a tier below that in the standings each week. But it is a Red Bull car. Perez could just be going through a tiny bit of a rough patch. The championship is already out the window. I mean, he was kind of there, but did anyone really think he was going to sustain that over the whole season? I don't think so. But that would be option B, is just to continue to chase, dig that hole to try and get out of the hole, that sort of thing. And then option C is the combination of the two. So I could go Gasly to Stroll, triple up on the Aston Martin, and then go Perez to Russell to kind of get away from the Red Bull. If I'm not feeling what Sergio is doing, he's making a lot of mistakes in qualifying and practice. It's just not coming together for him over the last 2 or 3 races. So that would be slightly exciting to kind of get in on Mercedes. Russell's driving really well. That car seems to be getting better. But once again, we got to wait till FP 1, 2, and 3. I think option B is probably out the window. I don't think I want to be that exposed to the meta. But option A, option C, option A is so boring, but probably the sensible play. There's still over 15 races to go this season. Probably more, actually. I'm probably forgetting one. Option C is kind of a bit of both. And if Gasly's not doing so well, we'll see. There's so many options, but I think the biggest talking point is that there's actually something to talk about, which is very encouraging for like the rest of the season. I think people, even if it's just kind of like you got a itch that you want to scratch and do something different, like it seems like the opportunities are there to kind of make a sensible leap. That's what I thought I was doing last time out with Pierre and Nico in for Lance Stroll and Yuki Tsunoda. But it didn't work out. But, as it's been this year, I feel like I've picked the wrong back marker every week. And then I went with the 1 week where the meta actually held firm again instead of just playing it safe. I kind of went risky and it bit me a little bit, but oh well. And here are the upcoming races. So we'll have another break after the Canadian Grand Prix with the Austrian Grand Prix, but that'll be a sprint weekend. I think that's going to be a very popular weekend for us to play our 3-time DRS boost on a certain Max Verstappen. Then we've got the British Grand Prix the week after that. And then we've got one more doubleheader with the Hungarian Grand Prix and the Belgian Grand Prix right before the summer break. So that's kind of what we're looking at. There'll definitely be at least a preview video before each of those, and then maybe I'll mix in 1 or 2 kind of different content videos between then and now. But that's going to do it for this week's episode of Backup Fantasy Sports for the F1 Fantasy 2023 Canadian Grand Prix preview. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, just give it a quick like. If you really enjoyed the video, you can even subscribe. Would really appreciate it. Trying to get to like 100 subscribers by the end of the season. That would be fantastic. Really enjoying all the comments on Reddit, even at the bottom of these videos. So really appreciate all the support and the views. And hopefully everyone does well in the Canadian Grand Prix. I'm still undecided what I'm going to do with my transfers, but hopefully this video helped you a little bit. And yeah, thanks for watching, and I will talk to you next time.